So the first thing we're going to do on Abaddon is we're going to work on all of the black armor panels. And the first color we're going to be using for this is Terradon Turquoise. Because if you look at the box art, you can see he's got this kind of almost like a greenish turquoisey teal kind of finish to all of the edges of his armor. Which is why we won't use something like Basilicanum Grey. So this is to establish our pre-shade before we put the black on. And so we take our Terradon Turquoise and we start applying this to all of the armor panels. And I'm going to start here on the chest. So we're just going to start painting this Terradon Turquoise all over the black armor panels. Like this. It doesn't matter too much if we get it on any of the trim, because this is going to be gold. Once all that Terradon Turquoise is dry, we're going to use some black Templar as a layer over the top. So we just want to add this black Templar all over. And where possible, we just want to leave that kind of edge glowing green a little bit. Or turquoise, I should say. With all that black Templar applied, the next thing we're going to do is apply a small spot edge highlight of FENRISIAN Grey to the armor panels. So we just want to pick out things like these rivets here. And the sharpest corners of these armor panels. Some of these highlights may look quite stark, so don't worry. We are going to do a final glaze on the armor. Just to tie all that Terradon Turquoise, black Templar, and the FENRISIAN Grey together. And once all those FENRISIAN Grey highlights are applied, we're going to create a roughly 6:1 mix of Ultramarines Blue and Contrast Medium. And we're just going to lightly glaze this over all of the armor panels. And with that done, all of the armor is now complete. So we're going to move on and paint the next largest area of Abaddon, and that is, of course, the cape. And there's two different stages to this. We've got the inside of the cape and the outside of the cape. And it's the same method for the tabard down here in the middle. So the first color we're going to do is we're actually going to focus on the inside of the cape just to get this out of the way. And we're going to be using Flesh Tearer's Red for this. And this is going to be slightly tricky. If you do leave it off, it'll be a lot easier. But in my case, I'm a child and I have to do it, build the entire miniature first. So what we want to do is we want to take this Flesh Tearer's Red. We want to go all the way up to the top here, make contact with the model, and just pull this Flesh Tearers down in one long brush stroke like that. And we just want to repeat this process over and over again until we've got a nice smooth Flesh Tearers Red finish across the entire model, like this. So we just want to keep going nice and methodically, starting up where the recess begins, or rather should I say where the cloak begins, and just pulling it down in these nice big broad brush strokes like this, getting a nice smooth Flesh Tearers Red finish. Once all that Flesh Tearers Red is dry, we're going to create a roughly 5-to-1 mix of Contrast Medium and Cygor Brown. I'm going to use this as a shade all over that red cape. So we just want to start pasting this red, this brown, kind of this thin brown mix all over the cape. And if you can, just leave kind of like the edges of the cape shining with that Flesh Tearers Red. With that Cygor Brown glaze applied, as you can see, we've now got this lovely deep red brown cloak. Well, the interior of the cloak at least. So what we're going to do is, just to finish off this interior of the cloak, we're going to take a small amount of Evil Sunz Scarlet and we're just going to apply some highlights to all the kind of rips and tears and hard edges that you can see scattered around the cloak. With that Evil Sunz Scarlet layer applied, we've now finished the inside of the cloak. So what we're going to do is work on the outside of the cloak. And so the first colour we're going to use for this is Basilicanum Grey. Now the application is broadly the same as the Flesh Tearers Red. So what we want to do is, actually that's a little bit too much Basilicanum Grey on my brush at once. So you just want to make contact with the model and just put it down in these big broad brush strokes once again, like this. And once that Basilicanum Grey is dry, we're going to give all of that cloak, and this is including the back as well, we're going to give all of it a layer of black Templar. And once again, the application is very similar. You make contact with the model, you just pull this black Templar down. Once that black Templar is dry, we're going to use some thinned down Dawnstone to apply some highlights to all the sharp edges on the cloaks. So we just want to use this Dawnstone paint like this, just picking out all these areas. And once that Dawnstone is dry, we're going to take a very small amount of Administratum Grey, and we're just going to add this to the sharpest corners of the fabric. So things like where these highlights all meet, and around the rips, and like the tips of the torn fabric like this. And with that done, the cloak is now finished, apart from all the fur, which is what we're going to do next. As you can tell, we've got this lovely kind of different types of black going on. So we've got this nice, smooth, deep, rich, shiny black armour, and this almost matte finish linen. I know you wouldn't call it linen, but it's funny to think that Abaddon is wearing his linens. Anyway, we're now going to paint the fur on his shoulder pad, and we're going to be using 3 colours for this. We're going to be using Skeleton Horde, Snakebite Leather, and Cygor Brown. Now, what we want to do first is we want to give all of the fur a coat of Skeleton Horde. So we just want to start whacking the Skeleton Horde all over the fur like this. We just want to get it all on there as quickly as we possibly can. Well, so this way it stays wet. because of course we are going to use all these colours at the same time. As you can see, I'm just liberally applying this skeleton horde all over. Like that. Just make sure that we get the front facing part here on the fur as well. There we go. So now that we've got all this skeleton horn on there, what we now want to do, give the brush a quick wash. And then we want to grab some Snakebite Leather. And we want to do much the same thing again. We want to kind of stick to this frond here. Like that. So you just want to start, want to get it all like this. Get it all over. Like that. So we get this kind of transition between the two browns. Just to strengthen that, I'm going to take a little bit more skeleton horde, and just where they meet, just paint it across the line like that. So we kind of get that more of that fade. And then lastly, we want to take a small amount of Cygor Brown, not very much at all, and we just want to apply this to the front part of this pelt, like this, just pulling it out. Like that. And then once again, we take skeleton horde rather than Snakebite Leather, because skeleton horde is our first colour. And we just once again just paint it across where the Snakebite Leather and the Cygor Brown meet, just to get that fade in, so it kind of blends the colours together like that. And once that's dry, we want to use some Screaming Skull just to highlight all these fronds in the fur, and we just kind of want to really just pick out the tips of it, just to kind of give it that shine, and to add a little bit more variation in the colours of the fur. And with that done, we've now got a wonderful looking fur coat. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint all the silver details next. And you might be thinking, hey Josh, why don't we do all the gold details first? Well, there's a good reason for that, because the silver details are quite often inlaid with gold. So for example, up here on this totem, this whole panel is silver and then the eye is gold. And we don't want to do the gold and then do the silver afterwards, because that just makes things more complicated. So we're going to use some thinned down Iron Warriors for this. So we're just going to take some on our brush and we're just going to pick an area to start. So I am actually going to start up here. I'm just going to start coating this Iron Warriors all over the area that I want to be silver. As I said, this doesn't include any of the kind of detail, but because we're doing the gold second, doing it this way means that if I do get any silver on it, it's not the end of the world, because I can cover it back up. And with all that silver applied, we're now going to paint in all of the gold details, and for this we're going to be using some thinned down Retributor armour, and there is a lot of gold details on Abaddon. It's mostly trim and things like that. We just want to give a good even coverage of this Retributor Gold 2 all over. One thing to point out is that on his belt, it's actually going to be red eventually, but we want it to be a nice shiny red. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint the whole of the belt with this gold. We're going to try and leave that iris that you can see in the middle there. Try and leave that still as grey seer, because that's going to be kind of a shiny amber gem. But we want to just get this gold all over, because we are going to paint it red. With all that gold and silver applied, you should have an Abaddon that now looks somewhat like this. So he was looking really good, now he looks really bright and weird. But don't worry, we are going to fix that right now. But the first thing we're going to do, before we shade all of this metal, is we're going to paint that belt in like we mentioned when we were painting the gold. So the colour we're going to use is Flesh Tearers Red. And what we want to do is we want to just paint a very kind of smooth layer of this all over the kind of background of the belt. Just trying our best to avoid all the trim. If you do make a mistake like I've done there, you can just neaten that back up with Retributor armour. But as you can see, I'm not using very much here. Just using small amounts. I'm just going back to the pot frequently and often. With that Flesh Tearers Red applied to the belt, we're now ready to shade the rest of the metallics. Now we're going to be using 3 colours to do this, and I've got them all open at the same time because we do want the colours to interact as we use them. The main colour we're going to be using is Basilicanum Grey, but we're also using Skeleton Horde and Guilliman Flesh. And the reason for this is that because in certain places the metal's almost kind of quite dirty. So for example, on the banner pole thing here, this is a Basilicanum Grey wash, but we also want to use a bit of Skeleton Horde just to kind of add a bit of dirt to it. Similarly, we want to use Guilliman Flesh for some of the bullet casings, but we also want to add a little bit of Basilicanum Grey here and there. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to demonstrate some of these areas. So we're going to do that metal banner pole. So we're going to take the Basilicanum Grey. We don't want that much. And we're just going to apply this as a shade all over the silver. Like so. But once it's on, we want to give the brush a quick wash. And then grab a little bit of Skeleton Horde and just sort of add patches of it whilst it's still wet. Like that. Just to kind of give us that impression of the dirty metal. Similarly, on the front, we're just going to use Basilicanum Grey again. I'm going to go over all that gold as well. Like that. And then we want to take a little bit of Guilliman Flesh and we want to just run this over that gold like that, to kind of give it the impression of like glory days gone past. Still a bit of that kind of warmth in there, but it's mostly dark. And what you want to do is you just want to kind of go around the model doing it like this. Some areas are just going to be one colour. So like the claws, you want to do that all Basilicanum Grey. And for the majority of the gold, you just kind of want to do that Basilicanum Grey, or just mix in a bit of Guilliman Flesh. It's really up to you. Or you can alternatively check out the box art, where you can see, for example, on his pauldrons, that there's kind of darker areas nestled in within there, and they're kind of brown. So honestly, just, yeah, it's up to you as you go. But, yeah, go around shading all of the miniature. And with all that shading applied, we now have some really cool looking metallics all across the model. Now, before we highlight any of these metallics, we're actually just going to colour in a few more of the base colours, and then we're going to do a lot of highlights all at the same time. So the first colour that we're going to work on is all of the extra black Templar details that we haven't already covered. And this is for things like the cables and this top knot wrapping here, and the gun casing, and various things like that, like the soft parts on this helmet up here. And as I say, the colour we're going to use is Black Templar. So you're just going to take a little bit of the Black Templar, and we just want to be careful whilst we're doing these cables, because we've already shaded those metallic bits of the cables. So do you want to get loads of Black Templar all over the metal bit that we've already done? But if we do, it's not the end of the world, because we are going to highlight it. And next up, we're going to use some Wyldwood for all the brown details, and these are the stakes on his banner pole and the wrap on Draken Yen. So we just want to take the Wyldwood, and we just want to paint this all over. And next up, we're going to paint in all the bone details. So these are all of the skulls scattered around the model, and there's the occasional little tooth poking out of the armour. So the colour we're going to use for this is Skeleton Horde. We just want to take some of this on our brush and just whack it on all over the skulls. And next up, we're going to paint in the red details, and this includes the helmet, the hair, and the hilt of Draken Yen. But we just want to avoid these little spines coming off the side, because those are also going to be the same colour as the flat of the blade. So we're going to use some Blood Angels Red for this. And we just want to take that on our brush and start painting it all over these details. And with that done, we're now going to do the highlights on the model. We're just going to leave Draken Yen, the face, and the two glowing eyes of Horus, or Abaddon now, for now, because we want to just get the rest of the model finished, and then we can focus all of our attention on these details. So the first colour we're going to highlight is, of course, all of the gold, and we're going to be using Liberator Gold for this. So what we want to do is we just want to apply an edge highlight of Liberator Gold to all of these details. And with all of that Liberator Gold dry, we're now going to give all of the silver details a highlight of Iron Hand Steel. And next up, we're going to use some Screaming Skull just to highlight all of those bone details. And next up, we're going to use some Dawnstone to highlight all of those black details. And next up, we're going to use some Evil Sunz Scarlet to highlight all of the red. With all those highlights applied, it's now time to work on the blade of Draken Yen. And so the first colour we're going to use is Aethermatic Blue. And we want to just concentrate this in the open mouths of all of the screaming faces of the sword. Just painting this Aethermatic Blue in there. And then once all that Aethermatic Blue is dry, we're going to use some Talassar Blue, and this is going to be the main colour that we're going to put across all of the miniatures. So we want to include all of these spikes down here. Like that. I'm just going to wash my brush. But we also want to do this across the whole of the flat of the blade. And so we just want to kind of take this very steady, and we want to try and avoid going into those recesses where we've painted the Aethermatic Blue. So we're just going to start at the tip. I'm just going to paint a nice even coat. Like this. All the way down the blade. Once that Talassar Blue is dry, we're going to take a small amount of Ultramarines Blue, and we're just going to apply this on one side of the sword up here like that. And then we're going to apply it down here as well. And we're going to apply it around the rim of the sword as well. And once that Ultramarines Blue is dry, we're going to use some ULTHUAN Grey as a highlight. So we just want to use this ULTHUAN Grey to highlight all of the edges of the sword. You don't want to use very much of this as you do it, because you want to have lots of control over where that ULTHUAN Grey ends up. Like I'm doing here. We also want to use this ULTHUAN Grey just to build up those recesses in the mouths. So we just want to paste a little bit of it in there. And then lastly, just to finish off that sword, we're going to make a roughly 8 parts contrast medium and 1 part Akhelian Green glaze. And we just want to very gently paste this all over the sword, just to pull those ULTHUAN Grey highlights in a little bit. I'm just going to try and avoid the recesses of the faces, because we want those to be nice and bright. Next up, on Draken, we want to use a tiny dot of Phalanx Yellow just for the spines and for the eyes in the hilt of the sword. And then lastly, just to finish off the sword, but also the rest of the red details, we're going to use a spot of thinned down Fire Dragon Bright, just to supply a little spot highlight to all the sharpest areas on the red details. And as I say, we're also going to do this on the helmet and on the hair. And next up, we're going to use some Ork Flesh just to colour in that lens on the Space Marine helmet. And with that done, we're now going to paint the eyes of Horus, and there's only 2 on this guy rather than on Horus himself, where there was about 1 million. The 2 colours we're going to be using for this are Iyanden Yellow and Gryph Hound Orange. And so what we do is we take our Iyanden Yellow, I'm going to demonstrate this on the big one, on his shoulder, And we just paint this Iyanden Yellow all over the eye. Don't worry if you get it in that central reservation, because we are just going to go over that with black. And the black Templar covers over the Iyanden Yellow nice and quite nicely. So we get the Iyanden Yellow on there like that. Wash the brush. Then we take a bit of Gryph Hound Orange, and then just around the inside edge of the eye, whilst it's still wet, we add this this Gryph Hound Orange, like so. And then we wash the brush. And then we use the Iyanden Yellow once more, just to smooth out that transition between the two. So we just kind of paint it where the two colours meet, like so. And next up, once that Iyanden Yellow and the Gryph Hound Orange are dry, we take some black Templar, and in this central reservation here, for the pupil of the eye, we just paint this black Templar in, like so. Similarly on the little one on his belt, we just want to paint the pupil in freehand style, just as a small little line going down the middle. With those eyes complete, the next thing we're going to do is work on his face. And so the colour that we're going to use for this is Guilliman Flesh. And what we want to do here is we want to take the Guilliman Flesh on our brush, and we want to start at the chin and work up to the top knot with our brush stroke. So we make contact with the model at the chin, and then we just, with a single brush stroke, pull it up like that. And we just want to repeat this process, always kind of starting at the bottom and ending up by the top knot. Of course, sometimes you won't be able to get there, and if that happens, you just find the closest recess. So in that case, it was the plug on his forehead. Once that Guilliman Flesh is dry, we're going to use some thinned down flayed flesh just to apply some highlights to his skin. So we just want to take a tiny amount of it on our brush. We just want to paint this all over the areas like the brow and the bridge of the nose and his nostrils and his cheekbones and at the bottom of his eyelid as well. I just want to keep doing this around all of his raised details on his face. So once again on the brow, going under that. And across the wrinkles on his forehead. And next up, we want to use a teeny tiny amount of black Templar, and we just want to paint this over the bottom of his eyelid. Like so. And we want to do it on the other side as well. And next up, we want to use again a very small amount of Magos Purple. Just to add a little bit of colour to his cheeks and to his eyes. So just want to paint this Magos Purple like this. Just really small amounts. Just adding that kind of unhealthy pallor. And next up, we're going to use some Screaming Skull for the teeth. And for the eyes. And then finally, We want to use a tiny dot of black Templar for the pupil of his eye. And with that, Abaddon is now complete. So now we've got to work on the base. And the first colour we're going to do is we're going to pick what colour we want that soil to be. So mine's actually going to be Wyldwood because I'm going to do the rest of the base with Sterling Battlemire. So I take the Wyldwood on my brush and I just want to start painting this all over where the soil is. Just taking care to avoid the marine on the base because we're going to do him afterwards. But we want to get the soil established first. That way we don't have to kind of pick around it whilst we're doing all the details. Instead we can pick around the details now. And for me this is just a speed thing. With all that Wyldwood applied, we're now going to paint in the Fallen Space Marine. Now you could paint it any colour that you want. Be it if you had a favourite opponent who constantly bullies you with his Imperial Fists or Blood Angels in my case, you could paint this just to aggravate them. However, what I would recommend is avoiding doing Iron Hands or Raven Guard because a black miniature standing on a black miniature will just kind of completely wipe out any kind of effect and it'll just kind of look a bit muddled. I am, because I'm a sucker for box art, going to do this guy as an Ultramarine. So the colour I'm going to use is of course Ultramarines Blue, and I'm just going to use this to paint in all of his armour panels. And with all that Ultramarines Blue applied, we're now going to paint in all the black details on the base. And mostly it's like the soft joints on the Fallen Space Marine, but it's also this long cable that snakes out around here. So we just take our slowly closing pot of black Templar, give it another shake. Make sure it's open. And we take the black Templar and we start painting it on all the details we want to be black. And once those black details are applied, we're going to do all of the red. And for those eagle-eyed amongst you, you'll notice that I left the banding on the helmet up here as grey Seer. And that's because I want this guy to be a Primaris Lieutenant of the Ultramarines variety. And so what we want to do here is we want to paint a red stripe kind of going across this. Like that, so we just block it all in as red. Like that. And then we kind of paint a line that goes alongside the blue. Like that. And yes, it is a darker red now, but that's what we want because we want that kind of shadow effect. Once that's dry, we're going to colour in all the gold details, and this is including the large pair of wings here in the background, and the trim on the Ultramarine, and any of the spent bolt casings that you can find scattered all over his base. And we just want to use Retributor gold for this. We want to get a nice, even, good coverage of this Retributor gold all over these details. This is one of those few times when you're painting when you can just really go to town with it. In this section, of course, you don't want to just be as haphazardly quick as I'm being here when you're doing the trim on the Ultramarine, because you'll be barreling towards having to correct an Ultramarine's corpse over and over again, and nobody wants that. So as I said, yeah, we're just going to cover these details in this Retributor armour. Then we're going to move on. And next up, we're going to use some Iron Warriors to colour in all the silver details. And this is for things like the Brazier's stake and the Brazier itself. As well as any of the metal details on the Fallen Ultramarine. And that cable casing just around here. With that silver part done, we're now going to apply some shades to the miniature. And what we're going to start with is the big eagle in the background. We're also going to do the Ultramarines gold details, but we're going to do them slightly differently to each other. So for the big eagle, what we're going to do is going to do an all over coat of Guilliman Flesh, and then we're going to use some Wyldwood just here and there in patches to kind of add a little bit more darkness to that particular area. And we can do this a section at a time. So we take the wings section, for example, and we just start putting this Guilliman Flesh all over the wings, being quite liberal with it, like so. And then we give our brush a quick wash. We take a tiny amount of Wyldwood and we just add it in here and there. Just kind of dabbing it around. Just to add a little bit more of that kind of worn away dark look. Like that. And for the Ultramarine stuff, we just want to use Guilliman Flesh on its own. So we just want to apply this Guilliman Flesh like this, all over these gold details. So similarly again, I'll do the base coat down here, just adding that Guilliman Flesh all over. Like that. And then grabbing some Wyldwood and just dabbing it around in there, mixing the two colours together to give it this kind of warmish, battle damaged look. And once all that's dry, we're going to use some Basilicanum Grey to shade all of the rocks, the spent bullet casings, and any of the silver details that we've got. So there's a rock here, so we're just going to use this Basilicanum Grey all over it. Like this. And similarly for the bullet casings, just going to use some Basilicanum Grey. And next up, we're going to paint in all the skulls using Skeleton Horde. Not that much. And next up, we're going to paint in the Flaming Brazier, and we're going to be using 4 colours for this. We're going to be using Iyanden Yellow, Gryph, Hound Orange, Blood Angels Red, and Black Templar. And the method for this is that we take a load of Iyanden Yellow on our brush, and we give that a good solid coat of Iyanden Yellow all over the flame, like this. And we just want to get it nice and covered in this Iyanden Yellow. We want it to be nice and wet as well, because we're going to be using all these colours at the same time. And this way, the wetter it is, the easier it is to blend with. Like this. So we just want to get that Iyanden Yellow all over. It doesn't matter too much if we get any of these colours on any of the silver, because it will just sort of look like the flames dancing off of the brazier itself. While still inherently being silver. Oh, that's a little bit too much at once. So there we go. As I say, we're just getting a nice coverage of this Iyanden Yellow all over the flames. So with that Iyanden Yellow applied, we then take some Gryph Hound Orange, and then around about from the tip to around about halfway, we're just going to coat this Iyanden Yellow, this Gryph Hound Orange all over where we've just added that Iyanden Yellow, like this. Like that. And then we take a little bit of this Blood Angel's Red, and similarly again from the tip we start adding the red, like that, not covering over as much as we have with the orange. And then lastly, just to finish it off, we take a little bit of Black Templar and we just add it towards the end of these fire trails, like this. With the flamestone, we're going to add a white highlight line to the lieutenant's helmet markings. What we want this to be is just a straight line that goes along each side . Kind of like this. And next up we want to use some Ork Flesh for the lens of the red helmet on the base that you can see just here. I actually moved the camera so you can see it. And similarly we're going to use a bit of Blood Angel's Red for this eyepiece here. And next up I'm going to use some Sterling Battlemire just to fill in that those blank areas on the base. Just before we do any dry brush highlighting, so we can do it all at once rather than have to do it twice. And once that's dry, we're going to give the mini a dry brush of Tyrant's Skull. And we want to do this all over the ground, the skulls, the Ultramarine himself. We just want to kind of very lightly do it on the Ultramarine. We don't want him to look like he's been highlighted with bone. We just want it to look like he's been there for a while. And just like the same kind of dust and dirt that's all over this battlefield has kicked up all over him. I've added some tufts to the base, and that means all that's left to do is to close this pot of Gryph Hound Orange properly, and then give the base a coat of Black Templar just to finish it off. And I'm going to take a couple of coats to do this, because we're just going to, rather than just pile it on, we're just going to paint these lines like this. But it'll take 1 or 2 coats to do it. It'll look a bit patchy to begin with, but eventually, as you know, it always comes together. That Black Templar rim done and some tufts added to the base, Abaddon is now done, and here he is in all his glory. I adore this miniature. I really loved painting this one. I think it's possibly my best work yet. Thank you so much for watching. I know a bunch of you have been waiting for this one for a long time. Like, comment, subscribe. All of your support is truly appreciated, and I will see you in the next one.